Welcome to Digitally Transformed, the podcast that brings you the latest insights into the ever-evolving world of technology. In this fast-paced digital age, staying ahead of the curve is more crucial than ever. Having the right partner to decipher what is important and useful can make all of the difference. Infused Innovations is a leading authority in transformative technology solutions. From bolstering cybersecurity defenses to equipping employees with the tools they need to excel, our experts are here to guide businesses of all kinds through their digital transformation journey. Listen in as we delve into captivating discussions about groundbreaking trends, emerging technologies, and their profound impact on the way we work and do business. From the practical applications of artificial intelligence to the fascinating world of machine learning, we'll uncover the possibilities that lie within our digital future. You're listening to Digitally Transformed, a podcast powered by Infused Innovations. Here's your host, Justin Starbird.
Welcome back to Digitally Transformed, a podcast powered by Infused Innovations. Today, I get to welcome back old friend at this point, Jeff Wilhelm, CEO of Infused Innovations, and a new guest, Brian Smith, our Senior Client Strategic Advisor for Infused Innovations. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, thrilled. This is a really interesting topic we're going to dive into today. Of course, we're in a spot where we get to, work with all sorts of clients in all sorts of different industries. And the reason we do that is because they trust our advice. We're advisors. That's in your title, even, Brian. So we're talking about planning and budgeting for 2024. And, before we got started, I always share with our clients and colleagues and friends that I feel like Labor Day is the second new year every year. And, it's the sprint to the end of the third quarter through September. And then it's, oh my goodness, we're in the fourth quarter already. What do we do? So with that, what are you seeing, for things from your perspectives relative to questions that clients are asking you guys?
Sure. So, from my perspective, I end up working often with, the strategic leadership at an organization, the C-suite, usually. And the questions we get are, often aligned to sometimes the tactical, like, what should I be thinking about next, first, next, and last, right? But we often, and I'm sure Brian will say the same thing, we often try to, of course, pull it up and align everything to the strategic objectives of the organization, right? Where are you going? What's happening in the next year? Do you have interesting things that, expansion, merger and acquisition, downsizing an office? What big picture things are happening? Are you entering new markets? Are you coming out with new products? Because ultimately, the technology, security, innovation spend aligns to those business objectives. I've seen a lot of questions recently about cybersecurity, concerns about that. We all read the news. There's no shortage of breaches and issues happening there. A lot of questions recently around data as a source of truth for business intelligence and business decision making. There have been projects around modernization of work that we've talked about getting onto client timelines for 2024. Things around workflow automation, right? Doing more with less, doing things better, more efficiently. But ultimately, I think most of our customers really just want to see that the budgetary priorities that are being put in place align to some sort of strategic objectives, and that there's some KPIs that can measure their effectiveness, and align to their organizational goals. I don't know, Brian, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that pretty much hits the nail on the head. And then some other areas that I'm still seeing discussions about are, we're still coming out of the post-pandemic. So we're still in that phase right now. And companies are still continuing to try to understand, do we remain hybrid? Do we force everybody to come back in? We've seen stuff like that in the news and sometimes backlashes on that. But also, just what does collaboration continue to mean? How well have we done over the past 2-3 years as we survived through the pandemic? What did we get right? What did we get wrong? So that whole, which plays in, by the way, to your comment about automation as well, that whole modern work environment, like the office has changed permanently now. So it's understanding what does that mean? And there's a lot of budgetary considerations. We have clients that are downsizing their offices. And I know of other clients that are upsizing their offices. So it's what makes the most sense for your organization and looking ahead to that. We haven't even really talked about all the other fun stuff of AI and stuff, coming down the pike, but get the basics down of just, what does collaboration look like in the underutilized spaces that you have in your office? What can you get rid of? What can't you get rid of? And what could you improve?
Yeah, I feel like, you guys mentioned a bunch of different topics there, and there's a lot to unpack, but really, it sounds like we're still trying to get our house in order to see where we're going. Is that accurate?
I think a lot of customers, at least the ones I speak to, are really trying to reconcile with sort of the, as Brian said, the COVID era sort of decisioning around work from home or return to office. Frankly, we're going into, fall and winter here in the Northern Hemisphere, and there could be another, wave of COVID related issues. And heck, even if it's not COVID, it's not going to be the last pandemic. So let's not put our heads in the sand. But all of this is against the backdrop of global economic uncertainty, and interest rates are up. So there's questions around capital expenditures and how do I allocate funding intelligently? What projects around infrastructure should I actually invest in, knowing that there's, again, interest rates are up. So there's a lot of that. And as Brian said, there's also the strategic planning around things like, when do I dip my toe into things like, the artificial intelligence? How can large language models help my organization? I produce all this great intelligence within my company. How do I use it for more efficient things? How do I help the people I already have find that information when some of them are in the office and some are work from home and some, who the heck knows, it changes by the day. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty. And I know, Brian, you and I were on a call this morning. There's uncertainty on pretty much, every client, even the ones that have things pretty well buttoned up.
Right, exactly. And just, clients are making decisions. The client, in question here is downsizing a bit and simplifying their office space. And we have questions about how is it going to be utilized and how to approach that. And, we generally recommend that, stepwise approach here, plan for something big, but stepwise into it, because you don't know the best intentions. Let's look at the coming out of the pandemic, the best intentions about everybody working remotely, everybody fully collaborating on this and that. Some of them went really well and some of them didn't go so well. And understanding where those issues lie, and then just being aware of those as you go into this next year to figure out, okay, what does Q1, Q2 look like, and what does an MVP look like for this, shall we say? What's the minimum viable product to get everybody working properly with each other? So as much as AI and data and the ongoing, continuation of cybersecurity, which is never ending, modern work is still at the forefront of just how do we work in today's world and collaborate in today's world really well. And I think it needs to continue to be, on everybody's mind. We haven't solved all those problems. So
I have to believe that, as you talk to clients and you're working with companies, and then, you're still working with people inside of businesses, and you're talking, from cybersecurity to AI to large language models to the different strategic services that Infused innovation advises on. I don't want to say you talk about scary things, but generally the folks that are in leadership positions got there because they did really well at their job, and they were really good at doing whatever their business is. And you're in a spot where you're advising against stuff that's, it is certainly real, but it's also really hard to, quantify, or it's really hard to like humanize and say, well, this is how it could impact you. Because as you mentioned, Jeff, at the beginning, we read the news or we watch we're online and we look at something and it's all sensationalized, and it doesn't all feel like it's personally, it can be affecting you until it does. So how do you break that down, or give the folks that are in leadership, especially at your level, CEO, CTOs, COOs, how do you give them that roadmap to ease into it and help them ask the right questions so that you can help them? Because it's got to come down to, they're not sure even what they're talking about often, but they know they need to do it. And that's why they bring you in. So how do you help them ask you the right questions to give them solutions?
Yeah, I mean, whether you're a CEO or not, everyone is human and has fears, uncertainties, doubts. They don't know everything, right? I mean, nobody does. And one of the questions I get asked most frequently by people in the C-suite is, tell me what other people are doing. There's that validation. There's that, I want to know, I don't want to feel like I'm on an island unto myself making these decisions, right? And I mean, I think that's natural, right? But they want to know what's happening in their industries, what we're hearing from other CEOs. They want to know what's happening in other industries, and what are you seeing, in the financial services vertical? What are you seeing in the, retail or, customer service vertical, or, construction vertical, or whatever?
Yep.
Because we do have that unique perspective, having, customers in a number of different verticals. So yeah, the same fears, uncertainties, and doubts permeate regardless. And they just want sort of a sounding board in many cases, but also that sort of objective, here are the known knowns that you need to plan for. There's always, the known unknowns, and then there's the unknown unknowns, not to make this too Donald Rumsfeldy, but those are natural categories to put things into when you contextualize a lot of the uncertainty and risk that's happening in the world around us.
Brian, what are you're kind of boots on the ground with some of this stuff and dealing with the folks that are actually going to have to do it. Is there a difference for you relative to, Jeff is looking a little bit further ahead, trying to predict the future. You're dealing with the people that are actually doing it.
It's interesting because I think as much as it seems like it would be different, we tend to try to approach it the exact same way, because when I look at advisory, no matter what level in the organization I'm talking about, there's a backwards looking historical, how did we get to here? There's the current where we are, and then there's the future where we're going to. That applies to every single level. What's different is when you get down into the nitty gritty level, shall we say, you do get a boots on the ground approach, feel for it, and what it looks like. So you can take that executive level strategic approach and make it more tactical, but still there is strategy in a strategical approach down at that lower level. If we just apply everything tactically at that level, then to me, there's not as much value as to, a director level, an assistant manager level, someone working in the warehouse level. Every single person at every single level has a knowledge base that is valuable to the organization. And the question is, can we tap that to be able to better serve the organization? When I was an IT director for many, many years, one of the things that I did when I went into organizations is not only would I have my, first week or two, I'm having my meetings with my executive team and saying, what do we do? What are your thoughts? How do we move forward? I'm having meetings with my peers and other directors and saying, what do your departments do? What are your fears? What is your uncertainty? What are your opportunities you see going ahead? And then I also go and talk to the different directors and say, you know what? I want to talk to your staff. I want to get down to the people that actually do the work. We all sit in our offices as directors and captain the ship, quote unquote, but who actually do the work. And it's fascinating when you start going down to that level. Not only do you find out the tactical, but there's a lot of good ideas that can come out of that level, because people say, hey, I do this all the time. It would be great if this were automated, or great if this were better. And then I can start to take that and throw it up a level and start getting it into strategic, and then start getting it into long-term vision planning. So really, it's advisory at all levels. When I go to someone and at a low level and I watch what they do, I literally have sat down with people for like half a day and watched what they do and asked the questions. I'm just like, so you copied that, just like copy and paste that a bunch of times throughout the day, right? And they're like, yeah, this sucks. This is horrible. I don't like doing this. And it would be great if it were easier. And I'm like, okay. And I say, you know what? You're going to be involved in strategic planning for this now, because you know what the motions are. And sometimes your director doesn't know all the motions. As an IT director, I didn't know every single thing that my staff was doing. I'm responsible for them, but I didn't know. So to me, that's where, again, looking forward to kind of circle us back at that planning and long-term planning. It's not only C-suite and directors. I always tell people, involve the staff in these thoughts, and pull a good set of people in the organization, so you get that really broad perspective, because then you'll find things that aren't on your strategic plan yet that probably should be.
Yeah. So how do you budget for that? I mean, thinking about, all right, copy and paste, and you're like, okay, well, he spends, or that person spends, 37 minutes a day copying and pasting into another piece. How do you then keep rolling that up to a spot where you can actually help them get to a point where they're putting a dollar figure in investment into IT that will yield that 37 minutes now available that wasn't there before?
Well, that's why I think the difference in approach, even though with the same strategic eye, the difference in approach that Brian and I take is super complementary, right? And this is true of all of the strategic advisors at, Infused Innovations. It's true of a lot of the meetings that I have with executives that we work with, because, Brian, for example, can take, the metrics around something and say, all right, this person times the other 20 people in this department spend 37 extra minutes a day doing this. Well, extrapolate it out. That's, $190,000 in wasted time, or potentially optimizable time, right? Not wasted, of course, but optimizable, we'll call it. But, then you can easily say something like, all right, listen, we think that there's an opportunity for, a $25,000 proof of concept to show that we think we can actually improve this, or a $50,000 MVP that we think we can solve this entire thing and make it something nobody has to do anymore. It's automated, right? Whatever. I'm making up numbers here. But the point is if the number to do it is less than the number that it was, that it's not happening with today, right? The number that is being used in time or lost value today, that's a win-win, right? So we try to quantify things in that way and have those conversations at the higher levels. But it's not that hard from our perspective to make those cases if we have actual data, which I think was the point that, Brian was driving at. The more people you talk to that are being tactical with things, the more data you actually have.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, the simple, the phrase I like to use is, I want you to use your brains, not your hands. It's a really rough way to say it, but it also is a way that kind of puts it in perspective, in that I view everyone in an organization as a knowledge worker. I know that the term knowledge worker is a very specific term, but I apply it much more broadly, because everybody has a value that can contribute to that bottom line within the organization, and has thoughts on making it better. So to Jeff's point about, hey, we can do a $50,000 MVP, show that it works, and even immediately get some ROI on that, then everybody, the first stage of that is like, look at this ROI we got. I'm like, that's fantastic. What about that 37 minutes that person's doing every day? What could we be doing with that? And now let's start expanding that area, because that's where you really are going to start to get the value. And it's not about, I always approach this, it's not about downsizing. Like, a lot of times people look at this and they're like, oh my gosh, you're going to automate me, you're going to downsize me. And I always look at it as, no. You have valuable knowledge that we need to tap into, and experience that we need to tap into. So now now that I freed up 37 minutes a day on this one task, what else could you be doing to help with the bottom line of the organization, and expand the organization?
So you're suggesting not to play fantasy football in those 30
Yeah. Well, you could. That'll expand the bottom line. Well, it's very funny. There are making someone's job a little easier and taking the mundane out of it. That is the one, as much as we talk about ROI and we can quantify and we can put minutes to something, I always talk about some of the intangibles, which are, you might have just taken a process that everybody in the department loathes. It is horrible. And when they have to do it, they get mad about doing it. It's horrible, and it lowers their emotional side a little bit of it, which means it impacts the rest of what they do. So
Sure.
yeah, that's kind of an intangible, and it seems kind of odd on a call, on a podcast here about tech and stuff like that, to be talking about that. But to me, that's all part of the advisory umbrella. It's not just looking at tech and how things can be better and how we can make things more secure and we can automate things. I also look at the business side of the equation to say, if your employees are happier, what does that get us to? And how can we then capitalize on that? So it's really a very full spectrum, full circle, we look at everything approach when I'm talking to people. I'm not just talking about the numbers.
Sure. Well, you're talking about goals, really. I mean, one of the things a business leader is looking at is, they're setting goals. Generally speaking, those could be improve company culture. It could be something specific like, improve the bottom line by 15% or grow revenue by X number. And, I think one of the things that's so fascinating about how Infused, tackles those goals is that, you have an opportunity to align those goals with operational systems that then free up that 37 minutes that then, could improve the company culture, because now it's not a task that's loathed and hated. And now they have a chance to talk fantasy football and improve, the camaraderie in the office. And I feel like that's something that's pretty interesting, that you've touched on, that, as you're starting with goals of the business, where IT and technical services, strategic advisory fits in. Is that accurate?
Yeah, exactly. And also that whole, the running joke in our podcast at the moment is of fantasy football and corporate culture speaks again to modern work, and what hybrid work means, and working remotely and interacting with people who aren't all in the same physical space. So anything, when I'm looking at modern work, and the umbrella as we apply it to modern work of this collaborative environment, everything is on the table in terms of the 37 minutes that were freed up. Hey, do we in teams do you guys want a fantasy football team and have something like that, or do you want whatever to fun areas in these collaborative spaces for everybody to chat, to mimic what happened in the office. The other thing I always talk about is, how can I, when we're in offices, there's two things that it's the same thing that we love and hate about an office. I can walk down the hall and get stopped 5 times before I get back to my office. When I'm going from a meeting to back to my office, I'll get stopped 5 times. Part of me is like, oh, wow, that's a pain in the butt. I need more time to do what I need to do. But maybe one of those times I get stopped turns into a 6-month project that expands the bottom line of the organization. It's those fortuitous meetups. So again, by freeing up time and trying to eliminate the mundane and getting people more thinking and more active and their emotional side up a little bit, from all the solutions we can present from a technology side, allows all the other, to your point, all the other sides of corporate culture, and which hits the bottom line. So again, it's really advisory across the board. Yep, I'm focused on technology. I'm focused on how tech can make everybody's lives better and make the company more efficient and add to the bottom line. But all of that I've been discussing plays into the entire, solution that's presented.
Sure. Thinking through all that, this planning stage, if we had this conversation 5 years ago, is a whole different discussion. But let's play it out with, again, we're thinking about you guys are the experts, generally speaking, when we're speaking, we're talking to CEOs of large organizations. They're not necessarily thinking about the individual elements. They want to make sure all their bases are covered. How has that changed over the last couple of years? We had pre-COVID, COVID, now we're coming out of COVID. Now we're going into whatever the next phase is, I think now. So, what does that look like?
Yeah, you just jinxed it, Justin. Now it's COVID 2.0. Thanks a lot. I think in some ways things haven't changed from the perspective of, you're correct that the C-suite needs to be focused on the long-term objectives and the overarching strategy and not get too bogged down in the minutia, which is actually why usually on larger accounts, we do align different resources to different levels of the organization. So, just like an organization's got their executives, C-suite executive leadership team, then they might have some middle management, and then they've got, people in the trenches doing the work and, doing all that interesting stuff. We try to align at those same levels as well, and then have our own whiteboarding sessions between the people at those tiers. So, for example, I might have a meeting with the C-suite, and Brian might have a meeting with some of the more tactical delivery folks, and then he and I might get together and actually talk through, what did you hear? How are you feeling about this? What might you recommend here? And actually then have more value to give back in both directions. Things haven't changed that much from that perspective of, organizations still want to have things aligned to their long-term strategic objectives. And, in many cases, the only thing that's changed is that they don't always have that full certainty over everyone will be in the office, no question about it, or this is exactly what's going to happen in the next 12 months, or, things are more dynamic now. Things do change a lot more quickly. I saw an interesting image about how long it took various platforms to get to, was it 100 million users or something like that? And a couple of years, back, it was like, it took this long, a large amount of time to get to 100 million users. And then, the next platform came and it was a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less, right? And then you've got things like, ChatGPT and, Instagram Threads or whatever, Meta's Threads product, right? And those were like, they hit 100 million users in like a week, right? It's crazy. The pace of change is accelerating, right? Change is happening more quickly. So to me, that's the biggest change that I see, is that CEOs and organizations just need to be able to react more quickly, which means sometimes your budget is big picture, sort of, here's what we think it's going to cost to do these things, but you're not planning 12 months in advance. You're budgeting 12 months in advance. You might be planning 3 to 6 in advance. And then it's sort of like, well, we'll see what happens 3 months from now. We'll see what happens 6 months from now. And we'll make those decisions again. We've budgeted, but we don't know exactly where every dollar is going to go. We just think we have some big strokes to sort of feel through. So that's been sort of the what I've been seeing, at least at the C-suite level, over the last, like you said, 12, 18 months.
You bring up OpenAI and ChatGPT. Looking at my calendar here, it's not even a year old that it's been public, but that is on the tip of everybody's tongue about how do they install that in their business, or what are their competitors doing. Jeff, you made the point on previous podcasts that if you're hearing an announcement, it was done 6 or 12 months previously. Thinking about the Brian, what kind of questions are you getting from C-level groups about how to use machine learning, large language models, AI, ChatGPT, OpenAI?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and it shows sometimes what the hype cycle has done to everything. There's so much focus on ChatGPT and large language models, and when you say AI now, that's instantly what someone thinks about. And to be honest, at the moment, that's myopically what anybody thinks about. They don't think about many other things. And some of the discussions I've had recently about this, I had a discussion the other day with a client, and they were saying, we want to budget next year for Microsoft Copilot. And we know it's expensive a little bit, so not everybody's going to have it. So we need to figure out who's going to have it, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay. It's like, let's also think about this a little more tactically. Something like Copilot, ChatGPT, those kinds of tools are broad stroke tools. They can be used in a lot of different areas. They might be, I'll put it the blunt way, decent at everything, but not great at any one particular thing. Or they might be. The other way to look at this too is don't forget the other options that exist out there. Rather than look at something so broadly as I'm going to implement Microsoft Copilot and it's going to do all these things for all these different people, we learn that over time, it doesn't do, like, people don't use it for everything. People find their niche and they use that particular tool for a particular task, and then they don't necessarily expand it until they're told to, or, hey, you can do this. So another way to look at it is to say, hey, what about targeted AI? What about specific tasks? What about computer vision, for example? We have a client that we've done a lot of computer vision work for. We have a white paper, it might have even been discussed on previous podcasts, that Microsoft has put out about them. And that's a really great example of an extremely targeted AI, where we said, you need to do this specific task with these specific images, and how long will it take to do? And Jeff, I don't recall the exact numbers, but if I recall, the like an analyst to analyze these images might be taking 15, 20 minutes an image to go through these images. And we built a computer vision AI that analyzed the same image in seconds, literally in seconds, cost pennies to do, and had an accuracy in the end when we hit the second use case here that was in the mid 90%. Range of accuracy. So now suddenly we're taking all those people that do the initial step of saying, hey, I have to spend 20 minutes an image, 15, 20 minutes an image to do this, and now flipping them around and now using their brains to QA what the computer vision did. So now, if you look at it that way, you've taken something that's incredibly specific, you've increase the accuracy. In theory, we're increasing the accuracy here because we're starting off the bat at 90, between 90 and 95% accuracy off the board. Now the people that were doing it initially are doing QA on that. So now we're going to fine tune it even more. So a company that did really well and had very high accuracy and was very well known for the quality of their data can now make that quality even better by targeted AI and by thinking about it a little bit more strategically / tactically, instead of just throwing the blanket over everything and saying, we want to cover everything with AI. It's not always the great answer, because we don't know, to Jeff's point, what 6 months from now looks like. The chat GPT space has moved so incredibly quickly that AI moves incredibly quickly, and the needs of an organization are moving quickly, that being able to pivot and move and make course corrections along the way is really important.
And it's not to say, of course, that, LLMs and, chat GPT don't have their place, for certain types of work and certain industries. It might be a major game changer, right? But
exactly.
The point about, there's audio machine learning tasks, there's text recognition machine learning tasks, there's computer vision tasks around object identification, there's insights in healthcare and financial services and streamlining of, there's so many different use cases, and an LLM isn't the magic solution to everything, but having thoughtful conversations around organizational objectives and then aligning innovative technologies to help solve those, improve workflow, add efficiency, that's where the real conversations happen. And they're the most exciting ones to have, because it shows that an organization can be forward-looking and progressive and thoughtful about this stuff, and take an approach of, we'll POC it first, right? We'll proof of concept it first, and then we'll MVP it, right? Create a minimally viable product, and hope that, it's going to impact everyone the way we think it is. But let's not plan, a year of delivery, about this stuff. Let's get to this first gate and then figure out how we might make it better for this user and that user and this other user, and iteratively add to it. And that's a great way to budget as well, because when you tie everything back to organizational objectives, if your organizational milestone is, I want a 5x improvement in this process, or a 30% time savings for this person, or this department should increase their revenue by this much. Those are measurable objectives. And you can start, if you're not measuring it, how do you report on it, right? If you're not capturing the data, how do you show back the value? So it all really comes back to that sort of stuff. And really data becomes the source of truth for a lot of that. And a lot of organizations recognize that if they don't have a good data infrastructure, or aren't capturing this data right or reporting on it right, how do they then make business decisions around it? So it's sort of a circuitous way of getting back to the point of sometimes the budgeting is, let's get the data infrastructure in place first so we can start capturing all the value associated with these decisions.
Yeah, that's exactly, it's funny, Jeff, the one thing we've been talking a lot with our clients about is data in terms of let's get our data house in order, quote unquote, before we start moving ahead here, so we can ROI this, we can quantify this. So I guess if we're looking at also budgeting for next year, one of the things, like your primary something high on your list should be, how's our data? What are we using? Can I relate all our data together? To me, that's, in our discussions that we've had with our clients, that's where the AI aspect, machine learning aspect, even just reporting aspect comes, tremendous value when you start taking disparate sources of data and start linking them a bit more. And a lot of companies aren't doing that enough, and a much more hyper focused on what's the value of our data, and if we link data set A to data set B, what does that get us? As soon as you start doing that, you open the floodgates to all the other possibilities that are out there.
Yeah. So much, again, to unpack there. I mean, I can certainly relate to the getting the house in order, because, there are so many companies out there that, are operating out, I don't say blindly, but, they have to go to multiple sources to get that one source of truth. And that's really, time consuming. It takes time and effort and energy and resources to pull all of those things. So yeah, being able to, it seems like, what makes Infused so good at this is that you can look at it from, big picture and help. All right, where do I start? And then narrowing it down so that you can create a path forward. Because I feel like a lot of times, I mean, I deal with this on the other side when you're trying to tell your story. So here we are talking about data and stuff, and that is a source of revenue or a source of time and effort. But on the other side, it's like similar approach to pulling the pieces together and the expertise to tell a story. And if we go back just again less than a year ago, ChatGPT and OpenAI, if you had finished your budget cycle and planning for, you were early on it and you were like, oh man, boss, guess what? We finished everything, or board of directors, we finished everything. You can stamp it and approve it here in October, just to start Q1. And then bang, was it November 30th is when it became live. And you're like, okay, now, you're spending December backtracking and figuring out what the hell you're doing. So going back to what Infused does so well, where you have this institutional knowledge to look at things from such a broad perspective, but then get into individual lanes, so to speak, and lay a framework and, goals and milestones out to get started. The clients, must really appreciate being able to say, feel vulnerable and be like, hey, I'm not sure where to begin.
There's really two primary responses I have to that. First is because we operate, and our folks internally operate on sort of the cutting edge, and we're involved in, a lot of alpha and beta, work in the industry, et cetera. We were able to advise our customers that while we can't talk about everything that you're going to see happening, because we were involved in the OpenAI beta, I think it was summer of 2022. So well before a lot of organizations were actually involved in their major 2023 budgeting, right? While you can't, sort of breach confidentiality, you can say, you might want to put a little money aside for some things that you might be coming down the pike that might actually impact your business. But one of the things we often do, and this is the second comment I just wanted to, call out here, is while nobody's going to have every answer 12 months in advance, when you're doing all your budgeting, you absolutely can do things that are considered sort of valuable around maybe like creating a center of excellence within an organization. So, let's say you don't know every AI thing that's going to happen in the next 12 months. Nobody knows every AI thing that's going to come out in the next 12 months. But we could say it's important to our organization to take a position where being innovative is part of our culture, being thoughtful is part of our culture. So we don't know exactly what that means, but we know we're going to put some money aside so that as these things progress and change, we've got some money that we can put into being innovative and really thoughtful about some of this stuff, because it's important to our culture and our staff to do that. And we work with organizations at all different stages of that innovation sort of life cycle. Some of them come in with no idea. They just know they want to do something, and we work with them and we ideate, right? Some of them come in, we've got this thing fully decided, here's what we want to build, and we help them build it. And others say, we just want to make this part of our culture so we can start thinking collaboratively about this stuff, thinking innovatively about that stuff. So we help them build a center of excellence within their organization to be that, to do that. And then, budgeting follows on with some of those decisions. Where are you in your life cycle? What's important to you as an organization, et cetera?
I think that's awesome. So thinking, forward to the rest of the year, well, first, is there anything I'd call that the unknown? Would you say it was the known unknowns is what you said, or the unknowns? But thinking about that, is there anything that we should be prepared for that you can't talk about?
Well, there's always things you should be unprepared for that we can't talk about. I think a good business decision maker knows that there's always going to be 33% of the time something they just couldn't plan for, and they budget for that, right? You budget for the unknown unknowns, right? And that's what makes a good, controller, CFO, CEO, is that you just don't know everything. The world is changing quick, right? We talked about this a little while ago. The pace of change is accelerating. So anyone who comes in and says, my crystal ball tells me that 12 months from now, we should be, doing X, and that's all we should be doing, right? I would just show that person the door, because it's just unreasonable to think that that's true these days. I don't know, Brian, I'm sure you've seen the same thing. You're on mute, by the way.
To the point of the budget and the flexibility, something I've also been saying recently is don't handcuff yourself to your budget line items. The good leaders know when to pivot and make an opportunistic change. Mm-hmm. In the employee world, we call it, everybody's always heard of opportunistic hires. You found someone that, hey, I wasn't really advertising for this job. I didn't really want to look for this job, but this person came up and it was available, and I'm going to take advantage of that. So the same thing to me is in the budget world with just tech and what's out there. There may be a pivot 6 months down the road, 7 months down the road, where you say, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. We should start going on this. And we should jettison a couple of the other things that we had on our budget and say, you know what, maybe let's focus on this instead. So being able to pivot is really important. And to Jeff's point about the center of excellence, I think that's a really good example of, if you build that up within an organization, then you start getting some institutional knowledge about what's out there. You have people inside your organization that they might not be experts on it, but they're your in-house subject matter experts on it, and they can help guide and act as that translation layer between what needs to happen and what's actually happening in the field, shall we say. And as an advisor, being able to interact with people who sit in that capacity is fantastic, because we can have these cool pie in the sky discussions about everything. Here's what's coming down the pike. Here's what I can tell you. Here's what I can't tell you. And then they can take that back and do some of the stuff that we were originally doing with the organization, and we're building them up so that they have the muscle memory to do this internally, and to start advising themselves internally. I don't like I sometimes talk about working myself out of a job. I don't think that's necessarily possible with advisory, But I like it when, I have clients that are coming to me asking me questions about things I would be bringing up from an advisory point of view, because then then the conversation shifts, and we start talking a lot more strategically about how that impacts everything, and they're ready to have that conversation right from the start. I don't have to bring them up to speed on something.
That's great. Well, we've left a lot of nuggets in here in terms of like how to leadership should approach, the next 3 months and looking forward to next year. Leave us with one good tip for planning for 2024.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, every time I have a meeting with the CEO, there is always that question of what's the one thing I should have on my, list? What's the most important thing I need to be thinking about? I usually turn it around because we're all advisors here, and you never want to give the wrong answer, right? So no, but I usually turn it around and say, what's the thing you're most afraid of right now? What are you most worried about? What's the biggest pressure on your business, right? What's the thing that would have the biggest impact? And I like to hear the answer to that. But if it's ambiguous, or there's 50 answers to that, or well, it's situational, or it depends. The thing I always say is you can't go wrong budgeting for two things: security and innovation.
Yeah, exactly. And to expand upon that, it's making sure everybody's in that right mindset. A couple I used to have a couple phrases that I would hang on my door at, outside my office at every place I worked. And one of them was, what got us to here won't get us to there. And basically getting that mindset that you're not encumbered by your past, and past decisions. And then the other part, which is along those lines and Jeff knows this well, I'd say this a lot, or in terms of, I reference her, Rear Admiral Grace Hopper. Anybody who's listening, go research her. She's an amazing woman. The most dangerous phrase in the language is, we've always done it this way. And we know that's the whole point of the innovation side here, is like, so when you're budgeting for things, also being open to the idea of 6 months from now, something might radically change that how we just built something to get us to here. And guess what? If something changed, then maybe I need to jettison 20% or 30% of what I just built and rebuild it a little bit better, because now I can go way further down the road than I ever anticipated with this one little change. So being adaptable is really important, and also having a budget that's built in a way to help with some of that adaptation.
I don't know how the phrase goes exactly, but when the first car rolled off the assembly line, there was a number one horse salesman, right? And they were selling horseless, they were selling, carriages for horses. So, yeah, I mean, you never know when that is going to strike. I think this has been, truly enlightening to think through not just how to look at, IT in general, but also how to budget for it, what to look forward to. And ways in which, you can get involved. I think the biggest fear that most people have is asking dumb questions, right? Especially when you're in a leadership position. They don't want to feel stupid or that they don't know something. And so, I feel like with IT, there are no bad questions, because we're all trying to protect ourselves, as you said, Jeff, with security, and innovate and be invaluable for later. So, knowing where to start, or having a partner that helps you create a starting point is probably the most important objective for the next several months. So with that, guys, thank you so much for imparting your knowledge and your expertise here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll say continue to encourage people to ask dumb questions.
That'll be the title of the podcast. Ask dumb questions.
No. So continue down that path, everybody.
On behalf of Strategic Client Advisor for Infused Innovations, Brian Smith, and Jeff Wilhelm, the CEO of Infused Innovations, you've been listening to Digitally Transformed, podcast powered by Infused Innovations. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to Digitally Transformed, a podcast powered by Infused Innovations. For more information and to learn more about this topic or explore other resources, go to our website, infusedinnovations.com. On behalf of our guests and host Justin Starbird, thank you for listening.